Hello there, and welcome to part 4 of this seminar, where I'm exploring the theory and the technology of this notion of the church, of the contradiction. So in the first talk, I looked at this notion of the hysterical God and the freaked out fundamentalist, and kind of looked at this notion of the inherent self-division of reality and the importance of confronting this, of experiencing this, how it's a destabilizing presence, but ultimately an emancipatory one. Then I went on to look a little bit at what this parotheological approach looks like in comparison and contrast to the conservative tradition and the progressive tradition, and looked at this notion of a liturgy that draws you into doubt, complexity, and unknowing. And then in the third session, I had my friend Barry Taylor with me, and we just had a chat unpacking some of the ideas that were in those first two talks. Now I want to kind of move a little bit closer to what this looks like in practice. Next week, I want to get into much more practical issues, but this is getting us a step closer. And what I want to do is, in a nutshell, first of all, describe what is the purpose of this kind of parotheological community, this religionless community, or what I would call a commune. I want to contrast it with anything like an educational establishment, an ethical school, an activism group, or a social gathering. Right? Those are elements that maybe a church can have, but it's not what is specific to a church. If you kind of ask yourself, what is it or what should it be about this weird group called a church that is distinctive? What I want to say is that it should be the place where you have an encounter with the groundless ground of being, and where you're oriented to and become sensitive to that groundless ground in your life. So conversion is kind of the first one. You have this destabilizing encounter with this groundless ground. And the second is discipleship or fidelity, which is a type of orientation towards this and sensitivity to it in your life, allowing it to permeate your existence and influence how you interact with other people politically and culturally and religiously and personally. And that is different from, educational establishments or social groups. That's why this is not the same thing as some sort of activism community. It has a very specific role, this 1 hour on a Sunday. Okay. And it does this through liturgy. And liturgy really melds together three things. It communicates to the mind, the heart, and the body. You could say that there is, to make it all 3 points beginning with S, spoken word, song, and sacrament. It doesn't quite capture it, but you could say maybe a little bit more accurately, there is communication that speaks to the mental faculties. There is art that communicates affect and brings you into an experience. And then there is bodily sacrament, which is where you enact something in a type of performative way. And these all mix together in a particular combination to invite this encounter with, I say, what I'm calling here the groundless ground. Just to touch on something that I've already looked at briefly in the other seminars, and this is very influenced by a thinker called Laplanche, a French thinker who's psychoanalyst and theorist, who was analysed by Lacan. And in his work, he is incredibly sensitive to the idea that the first question that we encounter, the question that marks us from the beginning of our lives to the end of our lives, is the question of, what does the other want? Whenever you encounter your parents, there is something enigmatic to that encounter. They make demands. They communicate to you what they want and what they don't want. But in addition to that, there are enigmatic signals that don't quite line up with what they say they want. So, for example, you might do everything your parents would like, and your sibling is always disobeying them. But you get a real sense that their favorite child is the sibling who is actually disobeying the demands, right? You're doing everything that's demanded of you, and yet strangely, you're not getting the desire of the parent. There's something about it that just isn't being communicated. So these enigmatic signals can be described as the mystery of the other. And then as the infant moves forward, they start to question their own desire. It is through trying to respond to this enigmatic dimension of the other, the question mark, what does the other want, that you begin to ask the question, what do I want? And your desire is wrapped up in an attempt to answer that question. And then you could say that the solution to this in Laplanche's writing is that you realize that the mystery of the other is a mystery in the other and a mystery for the other. In other words, it's not just that they're mysterious to you. They don't know what they want either. They are a mystery to themselves. And so in this realization, you start by going, oh, they have these desires that I don't know. And then coming around to the idea that, oh, they have desires that they don't know. And then we have to bear the weight of that insight. So that's something we've talked about a little, but I want to kind of bring you back to it as I talk about this in relation to the work of parotheology. You could say that, in a sense, all of us are born with a type of psychotic core. And the psychotic core is the notion, I think autism might be an exception to this, but we experience a type of unity with the mother other. There is this closeness to the other that must be, something must come in between us and the other. Something has to get in the way, an obstacle needs to occur. So there's this psychotic unity. Then there is alienation, and alienation is where you start to move apart. And then there is separation. And in the Bible, you could say that the psychotic unity is the Garden of Eden, where there is no real separation or loss. You know, there's a type of oneness, there's a type of harmony in the universe, and perhaps we could say that there's a type of non-alienation between you and the divine. Now, this is beautifully captured in the 2014 movie Noah by Darren Aronofsky. So in that movie, it really is, I think, an interesting kind of study in psychosis. Noah has this unmediated relationship with God, and it is madness producing. He hears God, he's responding to God, and God has these desires that are overwhelming, the desire to destroy the world, right? And so that's kind of like a almost psychotic kind of too muchness of the mother other. And in the work of Lacan, he says the first thing one has to do is find, the infant wants this, they want some separation. So often whenever a parent takes their child to school when they're very young, they can think that the child hates this, and indeed the child might be crying, might be showing anxiety, or might be all sorts of affect, but they're often picking up that the parent doesn't want the separation. And actually, as soon as they go in through the doors, they're totally fine, right? So the child is picking up the anxiety of the parent, but in a way, the child needs to get some distance. And this is why Lacan called the mother a crocodile, right? And he said that you have to put something in the mouth of the crocodile, a stick, to stop the jaws crunching upon you, right? That's the psychotic experience, that the other is going to completely consume you. And you need something to stuff in the mouth, which is called the name of the Father. It is something that gets in the way. And in the Bible, this is the covenant. So in 2014 movie Noah, you have this unmediated too closeness of the divine other. And then at the end, the covenant is precisely designed as a way to mediate, to get distance from the other. So for example, we think of contracts as kind of connecting two people, but really the role of a contract is to separate you from the desire of the other, right? So if you're setting up a business with your friend, the point of a contract is to protect yourself from their desire, because their desire might change. There is an unknown dimension to them and to yourself. And so in 3 years' time, you could be fighting over the business. And what the contract does is it creates a certain distance from their desire, so that if they no longer like you or you no longer like them, you still have the contract. Even a marriage covenant is similar in sickness and in health. It's like your desires will change over time, and at different, in different periods, there'll be hatred and love and frustration and all of those things. But the covenant is designed to, in some way, provide enough distance from that so that you can continue to relate. So in a way, the covenants in the biblical text aren't designed to bring you close to the divine other, but to instantiate some sort of gap, which we can call alienation. And then you could say that the whole point of the crucifixion is to enact separation, which is where you realize that, because whenever you feel that separation from the divine other, right, you feel it, you feel doubt, you feel unknowing, you feel anxiety, and there's no way to kind of like overcome that. You're divided from the other, so you have to live with this unknowing, you have to live with this anxiety. But in the crucifixion, you realize that God is unknown to God. That anxiety is woven into God, which is, my God, why have you forsaken me? The crucifixion, which is not just the death of God, but also the self-division of God. Now, this isn't just a move from Judaism to Christianity, because in the book of Job, you see this move as well. So you can see this move within Judaism, but it's very much writ large in the image of the crucified Christ. So, what I'm trying to do with Church of the Contradiction, it's not about simply expressing alienation or unknowing, although that's an important step, right? If you can bring people to the place of experiencing anxiety, unknowing, and alienation, that is a good thing, and realizing that it is an inherent part of us, right? So that's part of the step, right? But it's also going further than that. It is enacting the sense that those are woven into the divine other. This actually can maybe differentiate what I'm doing with parotheology from what was happening in the UK in the 90s, called the alternative church, the alt worship community, and what was happening in America in the noughties with the Emergent movement. So both of those movements, to a certain extent, were embracing an inherent doubt, unknowing, and complexity, and they were bringing that into the heart of liturgy. And it wasn't just something contingent that you could get rid of. That movement largely was about how to incorporate that into one's life, into a religious structure, and how to carry that within us. So there's a certain sense, and that's why I was part of the Emergent Church, because that was an important first step. However, the Emergent movement and the alt worship movement, I don't think, had the insight or the skills, sadly, in the leadership to bring us to the next step. So what happened is there was an embrace of doubt and unknowing and complexity. There were liturgies that kind of opened up that space of contemplation. But it brought us to what Hegel would call the unhappy consciousness, the stage of the unhappy consciousness, which for Hegel is the point in human development and historical development where human beings feel themselves separated from ultimate reality. They feel that separation, and he calls it unhappy consciousness because you kind of don't have access to the truth. You don't have access to God. You just have to kind of accept that. And the problem with that is, and I think this happened, this is my assessment and critique of the Emergent movement, and there's a podcast that's just come out on an oral history of the Emergent Church, so you can have a listen to that if you're interested. I wasn't part of it, although I did give a small audio clip for it. But what you saw happen within the Emergent movement is the inability to maintain that space. is too hard. It's too difficult to stay in doubt and unknowing and mystery. You'll eventually want to try to resolve it or cover it over. And so what you see in the emergent movement with some people going back to conservatism, so there's lots of figures, but someone like Dan Kimball might be a good example, but like a move back to conservative religion. There was also then a move to progressive religion. And you see that with people like Wild Goose Festival and Brian McLaren and Mark Scanderett and Doug Pageant and others who kind of went into the progressive movement. Then you also have movements into commodity satisfaction, capital, the abstract increase of capital. I think maybe your man Miller might be an example of that, Donald Miller. And also then you have the move to psychedelic enlightenment and sexual liberation. And there's a variety of the emergent leaders also went in that direction. These are all ways to move out of the unhappy consciousness, right? That place that is at first liberating, and it feels wonderful and it feels incredible that you're able to symbolize that, you're able to put it into language, you're able to put it into ritual. But the problem is that until you're able to redouble it in separation, if you're not able to do that, eventually it will become too much and you will go back to, as I say, conservatism or progressivism, commodity satisfaction, psychedelic enlightenment, sexual liberation. All of those as ersatz gods, as ways of creating a defense mechanism, a barrier to this inherent question, this inherent unknowing that is within us, that originates from the other. This is why we can't be solipsist, is in a sense our first experience is the unknowing of the other, which is then redoubled in us, and then we discover it in reality itself. Okay. What I want to do then, just to finish this reflection, is to talk about how parotheology is an attempt not to just keep you at the level of unhappy consciousness, or not to kind of provide a way to overcome that, but rather through the mind, the heart, and the body, have a liturgy that brings you into it. Now, this means a couple of things concretely. It means that what happens in the liturgical gathering should be, say, music that doesn't just embody doubt and unknowing and complexity, right? That can happen, and the Psalms are very good at that. So the liturgy doesn't just embody the doubt of the congregation, right? And send it to God and say, God, we don't know the answer. You are the answer, but we have a question, and we have to live with that question all of our lives, right? That's something that we have to bear the weight of. What the liturgy does is it draws doubt and unknowing and wrestling and anxiety in it expresses it in intellectual form and in artistic form. But it, in a sense, is a reflection of, and maybe an avatar of God and of the absolute. Now, it doesn't mean that the music has to reference God as such. It just means it has to express these feelings, and the congregation will project God onto it. That's very, very key. The main defense that people will do within church is they will project their notion of God and their notion of completeness and their notion of a non-divided other. They will project that onto the leader, onto the artists, onto the liturgy. And the difference with parotheology to conservative and progressive liturgies is it will not give that God back. It refuses the temptation to give that substantive God that is projected onto the liturgy back to the congregation. Instead, what it does is it gives back a divided God through the liturgy, embracing doubt and unknowing and complexity, through art, through parable, through sermon, through music, through sculpture, through art, and through sacrament. It gives you back your own dividedness. Because what the individual in the congregation is doing is they're projecting a part of themselves, the ideal part of themselves. They're like splitting themselves. So I'm the one with all of the brokenness. I'm the one with all of the alienation. I'm the one who's self-divided. And then projecting out this idealized image onto the liturgy. And then the liturgy goes, no, this is divided as well. And that then allows you not to overcome your anxiety, but to bear its weight, to enjoy it, to see that it is not something to overcome. It is not something simply to bear, because some people are strong enough to bear it all their lives, right? But that's not what you have to do. It's where when it's redoubled, you go, oh, this is what unifies me with everything. It's what joins me to the other people in this group. It's what joins me to myself. It's what joins me to ultimate reality. This is a disturbing experience, but it's also an emancipatory experience. Now, it's difficult. I'm avoiding saying what this looks like too much. I will give some concrete examples next week, or in the next seminar. But I'm wary of saying exactly how it looks, because it can look like a million different things. You know, it's about creating a type of art that is a stand-in for the absolute, and that embraces a type of lack as fundamental. And to say that will be done in different ways depending on whether you're a painter, whether you're an artist, whether you're a storyteller, whether you're a speaker. But everything kind of should move in that direction. And it can be as simple as going out and finding a musician in a coffee shop or a bar who you think really sings about those issues, and then saying to them, will you come and be part of a gathering next week and sing your music, and just create a space for them to do that. But what I wanted to do here is just set that up for the next seminar and really show where parotheology sat in relation to emergent church and the emergent movement. The emergent movement, I think, did embrace alienation. It did embrace doubt, unknowing, and complexity, but it didn't offer an answer to that. An answer being the idea that somehow that is within everything. And therefore, I think that's partly why it ultimately collapsed, and it fragmented into all sorts of attempts to almost cover over again and regress from the advance that emergent church signaled. It was an advance because it did bring up that anxiety. It just wasn't able to put that anxiety into the divine itself. So I'll finish there, and I will see you for the next seminar. Bye-bye.